I got my start in the United States Army, and I was originally assigned to infantry, then Signal Corps, and then they moved me to the Quartermaster Corps in the Army, and they interviewed 84 of us, selected 4 of us to start up this new thing called Cost Schedule Control Systems Criteria at Headquarters Army Materiel Command. The first thing they did was send us to Air Force Institute of Technology, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. It was a 4-week class. They teamed us up with a number of people from Army, Navy, Air Force, because each service ran its own earned value reviews. So we're talking about those of us from different services going to the Air Force Institute of Technology at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And because the Air Force was ahead of us, we had them come in as a guest speaker, and Captain Hugh Langford represented them at the meeting I was at. I went out and chatted with him at the Coke machine at the first break and asked him how to get on these reviews. And little did I know, he wound up being my mentor for a good 40 years. Took care of me, including getting me on review teams. So he'd do things like call my boss, Larry Stone, and say, hey, if you guys really want to learn, you got to get on this review, and here's a good one here. And what he'd wind up doing is kind of horse trading, as he called it. So if you want Lieutenant Ellerman to get on this review, then I want Humphreys on the Northrop review. And Larry at first was taken back by that. He says, well, that's the deal. We got to trade here. And what Hugh did was he made sure that I got on reviews where I kind of grew, so I might get just the organization, planning, scheduling area. But when he got me into Northrop, or now Northrop Grumman and Hawthorne, F5 program, what he wound up doing is giving me the entire engineering area. So I got to go across a whole set of guidelines. Organization, work breakdown structures, dictionaries, scheduling, budgeting, the earned value techniques, all the logs, accounting, analysis, the whole spectrum. And I knew, looking back now, I knew what he was trying to do, make sure that I got a good breadth of experience. So I was sent out on my first reviews, Air Force reviews, St. Paul, Minnesota, Minuteman Weapon System Computer, and then as the Army representative, and then I was sent to Boeing in Seattle, AWACS, Minuteman, and SRAM, 3 program offices. So it was a Tri-SPO, System Program Office, Tri-Service, Army, Navy, Air Force review. And they put us on different teams. I think I led the organization and planning, scheduling, budgeting teams. We pulled the reports together. I think we were there 5 weeks. And Colonel Driesnack at the time came out, accepted our report, and they got certified or validated. That name's changed as we've gone through the years. Then I went on another review with the Air Force at Northrop Grumman on the F-5E aircraft. That was down in Hawthorne, California. I was the only Army representative on the team, entirely out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And I had a responsibility to go across all of engineering, so I had to do the organization, planning, scheduling, budgeting, accounting, analysis, and revisions or change control. So that was great because I got to go across the entire discipline. We manually wrote things out then a secretary typed it up, we redlined it and did it again. The exhibits or figures were copies of copies, ugly Xerox, gray kind of things, but we covered all the content. We had to learn from bottom up, just like on the Sperry-Rand UNIVAC weapon system computer in St. Paul, Minnesota. I looked at every work package in every control account I was responsible for, every earned value technique. I added the budgets up, both time phasing and at complete. We really learned grassroots, bottoms up, and that was true of all the team because there's nothing automated like it is today. So I argue it was a great groundswell for those of us in that era to pick it up and really learn the discipline. The next review, the Army had to start its own. We had to kind of stand on our own. And that was at Boeing Vertol in Ridley Park, Pennsylvania. So that was the first one. where I was the Army Review Director, leading the first review that the Army led. Again, we didn't have a central like Defense Contract Management Agency running the reviews at that point in time. Army, Navy, and Air Force did their own. Now, the Navy would be the only one that would lead theirs for the ships, Air Force for the aircraft, of course. Army would have helicopters, handled all the ammunition, but we tended to want to be consistent because some of the contractors worked with Army, Navy, Air Force. So I would tend to get a Navy representative on my team and an Air Force representative, and they would try and get kind of a reciprocal agreement, people on the other team. At the end of the reviews, we'd send our reports to the other two services, and we would be tough on each other, which worked out okay, because we wound up with something you could defend, substantiate, and justify up the chain of command. Another important aspect of getting cost schedule control systems criteria up and running was to ensure that we had well-documented facts, fact-based decisions. So what happened is we'd go out on reviews, and it kind of became a competition. So the Air Force would do their review at a General Electric, and they'd send it to the Army and Navy because there was this cross-pollination occurring. So what was important was to share your thoughts and observations, and that was openly discussed. It was kind of a fun, hey, you missed this exhibit here. I can't believe you concluded that without having the facts that supported it. So we kind of had fun with each other. Well, to make sure that I had it right, I always ran it by Langford first before I presented even to my own boss, Larry Stone. And he was a good critic. He made sure that I got everything perfect. And the important aspect of that is we sharing Army, Navy, and Air Force ensured that we had a high-quality, defensible, fact-based discipline documented so that it was irrefutable. The next review was in Van Nuys, California, the ANTSQ 73 program. Litton DSD, Data Systems Division, was the contractor. Again, these are all cost-plus reviews, cost-plus contracts that we were reviewing, and of significant size, or we wouldn't be there. I had representatives primarily from Huntsville, Alabama, also from the Electronics Command. I always had an auditor, Defense Contract Audit Agency person on there, and a local surveillance person, used to be called DCAS. End result of that is it was clear that we knew what we were doing. It was clear that we expected certain quality in variance analysis reporting and so on. So the first review that we did used to be called an implementation review, right after contract award, to see if they knew what they were talking about when they did the proposal. We made it very clear what our expectations were. Then when we came in to do what was called a readiness review or readiness assessment, depending on the time, we were very tough on them. Some would argue we overkilled. I argue it was a smart thing to do because we let them know that we knew what we were doing and what we expected in terms of quality. End result was then when we got to the final review, the final exam, validation or demonstration review, used to be called demonstration review, it was like a ceremony. Everything was perfect. All their people were well trained, all the data racked and stacked. It made everything a lot easier on both sides. So that was the end of my reviews in the service. And I make the analogy, it's like an IRS agent becoming a tax consultant. So I went outside and started consulting right away. So I was very lucky to have the opportunity to go and have lunch with Whitey Driesnack. I think he was a major when I first met him, over at Air Force Systems Command. So I'd take the bus from the Avis parking lot at National Airport over to the Pentagon, then out to AFSC. It basically became an all-day deal because you'd have to leave by 9:30 to get there in time for lunch. We'd have a 2-hour lunch just to throw out a time frame there in the cafeteria, and I just got to pick his brain the whole time, and he wanted me to learn, and he wanted to share the wisdom. He just, the perfect kind of person to share thoughts. I couldn't have been any luckier. So that's why I say, if anybody asks me, maybe I'm one of the older guys in the game now, but I'm really truly in the second wave. And that gave me the opportunity to learn the application of the theories coming out from Whitey, Dreesenack, and a couple others in real projects. The next person was, of course, my immediate boss, Larry Stone. He wanted people to learn so badly that he would make sure that we 4 lieutenants that got selected got to go out on reviews. And he made up these little white pocket guides that had all the lingo, abbreviations, and acronyms, quick definitions of what a work breakdown structure is and what it isn't, and variance analysis report, what it should and should not contain. So it was the perfect environment for somebody to learn. My roommate and others decided that they didn't enjoy it so much, so they went off into another career, or 2 or 3. I think I was the only one that remained. Right at the end of our career in the military, we were asked to go visit the Acquisition Secretary of the Army, J. Ronald Fox, a PhD from Harvard. I think he taught in the business school there, but it might have been the engineering school. And he asked us for a debrief, and what's ironic is the same kind of things we talk about today in terms of issues, we talked about at that point in time. So we shared with him what we learned, and I understand that he took that on to the next wave of people after us. But we were all forced out because they were cutting back budgets at the time. They didn't need us, so all 4 lieutenants were pushed out of the service. Then it went down to the next level of command, so it tended to be dominated by civil servants at the Aviation Systems Command in St. Louis at the time. Up in New Jersey, the Electronics Command, Missile Command in Huntsville. I'm not going to go through the whole list. But the point is, those people then, it kind of went decentralized. And then Larry Stone came in there, and he would still oversee. He pulled in a couple people after us, like Wayne Abba and Steve Bauer, a couple of others that are still around. Wayne, of course, is still in the game. Steve Bauer does other things, but that was kind of the way things evolved on the military side of it. On the other side, starting consulting, we went out to companies. It was a wonderful shopping list coming out of the Army, Navy, Air Force. They had a schedule of reviews, which was under Freedom of Information, accessible to anybody and everybody. So it was kind of a shopping list. These people just won these contracts. Here's how big they are. Their cost plus incentive fee, award fee, whatever. Here's where they're located. So we then targeted those people as people we could help by training, and then help them with their definition of the work, with the work breakdown structure and dictionary, the scheduling of that work, the integration of the costs with the schedules, and then doing mock reviews to make sure they were ready for the real review. So that kind of launched us. There were close to 100 certifications or validations in each decade, 70s, 80s, 90s. Some people started to lose their validations soon thereafter. We could talk about that forever. But it was a wonderful career to get started in, and that's how it got started. So in the consulting arena, I learned a great deal about the fact that there are many ways to approach satisfying the guidelines, or as it was called in the criteria. Everybody had different processes, everybody had different tool sets. Some had to be significantly enhanced, changed, wiped out some existing practices that they had, like wiping out scheduler cost variance once a month or once a quarter so that they could start with a clean, fresh slate. So there were a lot of interesting things like that that I learned. And it was significantly different in perhaps the armored personnel carrier tank business than it would be in the aircraft or helicopter business, designing and building such vehicles. So we had a lot of issues that came up: how to define management reserve, how to use it, when and how undistributed budget should be defined and used and logged in. This resulted in a lot of different opinions from contractors who wanted to share this with the government people and get some kind of guidance. So it was at that point in time we had the National Security Industrial Association, NSIA, and I learned that we had people from what was then IBM Federal Systems Division, later part of Lockheed Martin, and Sanders Associates in Nashua, New Hampshire, also later part of Lockheed Martin. These people were very active in addressing these topics. How should we deal with this? How do other people approach that? So I found that it was a good forum for us to exchange ideas. And this is like the mid, 74, 75. This is early in the game that people recognized they had a need to share thoughts with others. And the government enjoyed it because we were not being unequally unfair with one contractor A versus B. They formed the Performance Measurement Joint Executive Group. I'm not sure the exact time frame of this, but I know it took the right environment. So Gary Crystal and Wayne Abba were in the Pentagon at the time. They acknowledged the need to have more sharing of concepts and thoughts to come up with a more cost-effective approach to earned value, cost schedule control systems criteria. A lot of contractors were complaining that it was too harsh to adhere. The name was changed from cost schedule control systems criteria to earned value management system criteria. The concepts didn't really change. How you adhered to them might be a little different, but it was the same stuff by a different title. Ooh, criteria, that says we must adhere, thou shalt do. Why don't we soften that? So a lot of contractors were trying to get a little bit of relief. The name was changed from earned value management systems criteria to earned value management system guidelines. And the theory being that this is a nice noble target to shoot for, as opposed to thou shalt adhere. So this played very well with the contractors. Going along with that was their ability to get together and present common issues to the Performance Measurement Joint Executive Group. On that group, we had the head of the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, and that rotated a little bit through time, but the primary lead was Dick Garretson out of the Navy, Larry Stone, my old boss, out of the Army, and the Air Force evolved a couple times in terms of who the players were. But it was a wonderful interchange of thoughts and ideas. Defense Contract Audit Agency also played in that arena. We documented the results of that, what was called interpretive guidance, and we'd cite the guideline. We'd write a paragraph or a page or a couple pages on each issue, and it was then shared with everybody in industry. So it was a great leveling influence. Then we decided that system descriptions were incredibly different, and why should they be that different other than your own unique policies, practices, tools? So why don't we try and get those closer? Because some were too prescriptive and others were not prescriptive enough. And they varied, not that size matters, from 50 pages to 300 pages. Some were a lot more prescriptive than they needed to be, and some were less than they needed to be. They'll tend to have subordinate procedures, desktop instructions, and so on to support it. So we started what was in the rage process action team, and the process action team that I headed was for system descriptions. So we would have, sitting in the room around the table, General Dynamics, Boeing, Raytheon, sharing each other's system descriptions. We found we couldn't get through them very fast. So we made like if it was a General Dynamics issue, they would send in their paragraph or pages on earned value techniques, if that was something they thought they were over or under killing. The rest of us would read it, and then we'd talk about it, and we'd make suggestions. It was like free consulting from everybody in industry, a very positive stroke for everybody there. As a result of that, we did a few other things, like decide that we should present something that would be a little bit more palatable, watered down, that people could relate to in terms of cost schedule management. So we then started, and we finally finished in 1998, what was called the American National Standards Institute, ANSI, EIA, Electronics Industry Association. They gave it a number 748. That was in 1998. 7 of us wrote that. The head of our team was a gentleman, Bob Surrency, out of Lockheed, before it was Lockheed Martin, in Marietta, Georgia. He kept us on the same page. He adjudicated issues. I would say, well, that's way too much in depth. And somebody, no, it's just about right. So we had great discussions. End result was a wonderful, in our opinion, document, 32 guidelines. Our argument was we wanted to make this something that was palatable for everybody, that many people could use. We think we achieved that. We were a little weak in the scheduling area and in change management, and we don't even talk about getting certified or validated because we didn't care. It's just we wanted people to use the discipline. What you have to do is reaffirm that every so many years, and I understand we were behind schedule at doing this, so we went to 748B, Bravo, by 2007, July, and we bolstered up a little bit the discussions in scheduling and change management. We still left out getting validated or certified. We figured that was the responsibility of each procuring agency, that they could deal with that if they chose to. Then we reaffirmed it again because NASA said, if this stuff is so hot, we're putting it on contractors, we ought to be putting it on ourselves. Well, NASA's not a company. They are an organization. So we basically changed from 748B to C, company to organization. Other than that, I would argue it's not technically significantly different from what it was before. A couple of definitions got enhanced, and that was about it. Now they're in the process of doing 748D, so I'm going down a parallel path in terms of time. So here we are in 2017. We're supposed to make it by the spring or summer of 2018 for the 748D. We were thinking about making significant changes, but this is not the proper time to do that. So I suggest 748B, C, and D are going to be very, very similar in terms of technical content. With respect to the evolution from Army, Navy, and Air Force doing their own certifications, or we call them demonstrations leading to a validation at that point in time, some of the projects were very clear. It was an Army contract. They were making ammunition, even though the ammunition might be used by the Air Force. And some, like shipbuilding, of course, the Navy would head those up. So while I said we would share people if we could, if they were available, we still sent the reports. I had mentioned that before. There was still a feeling that there was a need to take the individual service certifications, even though we shared the reports, and have a team that was truly all together, and called it the Army, Navy, Air Force Service Reviews. So I was on the first couple of those service reviews. I would argue that even the Boeing one with the AWACS, Minuteman, and SRAM service was the real true first service, led by the Air Force, General Driesnack, Colonel Driesnack at the time. That was really important because it was at Boeing in Seattle. They were one of the big 3 or 5 or whatever contractors at the time. They needed a couple of good runs on the board to have people say, this saved me time and money. They did the first one in '69 at General Electric. And so there's a little competition here between the companies. And also the insistence that we be more consistent across the services. So we evolved from a single service to a tri-service. Now, underneath that, you had a breakout. One, research and development contracts. So you actually used to get a certification, or validation as I still like to call it, for research and development separate from a production validation. And the reason is very simple. In research and development, you have incredibly different systems. Things are moving a lot faster. The configuration is not firm of material and equipment yet because design is occurring on the fly. Whereas in production, tended to be a little bit more stable in terms of the configuration. Things like material price and usage variance made a lot more sense to be very detailed in calculating and using to analyze how I'm doing in a cost schedule sense in a production environment than it did in research and development where things were evolving. Tri-service. That was a wonderful approach in that it got us a little closer together. We were a little bit more standard in terms of how we planned and conducted reviews and documented the results. But the people still belonged to the Army, Navy, Air Force, Defense Contract Audit Agency, or whatever. When I say belong, that's who paid their bills. That's who they were aligned to, and they had a functional boss they had to report up to. So they then set up, and I'm not sure the exact timing of this, and I'm not sure the exact name of this, but as I recall, before the Defense Contract Management Agency, there was a Defense Contract Management Command. So this was a group that, of course, was made up from people from Army, Navy, Air Force, and other entities. They tended to have some contracts people in there as well. But that got people even a little bit closer together and more consistent. And they had a hierarchy of review directors, team chiefs, and so on. And they divided up the jobs, sometimes by area of the country, sometimes by product line like ships or aircraft, helicopter, fixed wing, or whatever. So that got them a little bit closer together, ensured more likely opportunity to have consistency in the way things are being reviewed and documented. Clearly, cost schedule control systems criteria, earned value management system criteria, earned value management system guidelines, depending on what time frame you're looking, were finally recognized as a program management tool, which is what it is, as opposed to a process and tool owned by the controllers, comptrollers in the different services. As a result, that evolution occurred. I'm not real crisp on the exact timing. It might have been when they evolved to Defense Contract Management Command, because they had contracting officers in that command. And I think they more handed off or recognized this is a program management tool. As a matter of fact, the program management personnel would always attend the reviews, usually as an observer, but they would be there because they want to make sure that the company that they had awarded the contract to was being treated fairly by this central earned value review team, cost schedule control system review team, depending upon the time frame. So after a number of years, a lot of contractors had certified, or we used to call them, I still like to call it, validated systems. And perhaps they didn't have a contract for many years, and they became a little stale. Maybe their managers forgot the basic use of the system, and maybe the tools became a little bit less than useful. End result was a new kind of review was created, subsequent application review, or SAR as we tended to call it. And it had been a really long time, and they tried to apply it to a different site. We might have an ESAR, an extended subsequent application review. So these were a lot like an initial review, but a lot different from the integrated baseline review that we've talked about at a different point in time. Who are the people that were heading that? People like me, business people. Where does it all start? It starts technically. So a technical baseline review, TBR as it was called, started out of Huntsville. General Chen, and one of the primary leads was Bill Smart. He actually created the first little guidebook we had on TBRs, technical baseline reviews. The beauty to this is the program office, the ultimate customer, was the one that headed that up. So it was not an earned value business people like me, it was techies leading it. Okay, well, they were only talking technical. So somebody said, well, why don't we talk, because we're there anyway, technical, schedule, and cost. And the schedule and cost could, of course, be addressed more intelligently by the technical people that are awarding the contract. So that evolved to the name Integrated Baseline Review, which is what we still use today. And it's a wonderful process led by the customer program office. They might take somebody from the Defense Contract Management Agency in there, or an earned value guru, or not. Their choice, depending on how they felt about that part of the contractor system, but they absolutely needed the technical people there. Those technical people would be like an integrated product team leader that maybe had all of avionics, who would interface with the avionics integrated product team leader at the contractor's facility. So it was a wonderful matching up at a little bit lower level than the total contract level of technical, schedule, and cost. So I had mentioned earlier the National Security Industrial Association. The base was shrinking, and because of the base shrinking, a lot of organizations were acquiring other organizations. So you could follow the trail of Loral and IBM Federal Systems Division into Lockheed Martin. There were a number of firms like that that got acquired, merged. Some of them had to get split so they didn't have a monopoly. The Justice Department got engaged. About that point in time, the NSIA, my opinion, had a shrinking business base itself in terms of contractors that belong. So they merged with another entity. I know the word defense was in it. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name, but we changed the name to National Defense Industrial Association, NDIA. We had a management systems subcommittee, MSS. We were the ones that dealt with the PIMJAG and all the issues and issued interpretation. You tended to have representatives from the big guys, the Boeing, the Lockheed Martin, the Raytheon, and it tended to be their focal points for earned value. At certain sister divisions, you might bring in more than one or two people to these meetings. But it grew. I was, I think, the fourth chair of that, after a guy from IBM and another one from Sanders Associates. And so at that point in time, we were really active. I had a very close relationship with Larry Stone, who was the PIMJAG lead and the Army focal point. We forced a lot of good meetings, interchange of thoughts and ideas. We eventually changed our name, Management Systems Subcommittee, and of course now we're known as the Integrated Product Management Division of the National Defense Industrial Association. That IPMD handle got put on us, 2014 or so. It was better than the Management Systems Subcommittee because now we were a full division. We had, in theory, a little bit more clout. But that's how we evolved on that side. We were also getting acknowledged and credit for things we were doing. So after the Process Action Team on System Descriptions and the creation of the ANSI, which I know we don't say anymore, it's just EIA 748, the David Packard Award was given to, 10, 15 of us, those that were pretty active at that point in time. And that was pretty important. And that was a significant acknowledgement by government to those of us in industry that we were really trying to help with the process and a more streamlined approach. That made a lot of sense, and it was good recognition. Another entity was created. It was initially called Performance Measurement Association, PMA, started by Fred Marchiona out of PerkinElmer in Danbury, Connecticut. And he said, Gary, he came to a couple meetings when I was the chair. This is great. You got all the focal points from all the big guy firms, but how about those of us that are in small firms and others of us, big and small, we don't get to hear what's going on. We have to sit there and take the scraps underneath the table. Why don't you, in fact, start another association? I think there's a place for it where we get to come in and get to talk about things that we don't know about, new issues. So it was a great concept. I really got into it. I ran for and was elected the first president of that. And the reason I was really excited about it was because we had people these are the people that work every day, scheduling, cost estimating, writing variance analysis reports, whatever. And we moved it around. So we had our annual meetings in Cincinnati, Newport Beach, San Diego, New Orleans, Boston. We moved it around. Why did we do that? Because we then got all the people that couldn't afford to go to the big national meetings for National Defense Industrial Association to participate. So we learned a lot more. We were a lot more productive. We shared a lot of that product with the NSIA or NDIA, whatever time you're talking about. So that, of course, has now evolved to the College of Performance Management. It went through a cycle where it joined up with Project Management Institute and then pulled back out about 5 years later because we needed more autonomy. Wanted to have a capability of naming our own awards, for example, like the Driesnack Award. So not only was there the Packard Award, but there was one named after Whitey Driesnack about the time that he passed on. And I think there are 12 or 14 awardees at this point in time. And everyone did a great deal to contribute to the industry and help foster a relationship where we all shared better concepts and thoughts. In terms of the evolution of the relationship between the customer and contractor community, I've been presenting a lot of interplay where we're sharing thoughts and ideas and how that's improved the cost effectiveness of the design and implementation of systems. It doesn't come without challenges. We find the good news here is it's very flexible in terms of how you interpret some of the guidelines, and the bad news is it's very flexible. So you will, of course, have, based on precedents, strong feelings and opinions about what is and is not acceptable would evolve over time. You have fairly strong-willed people on both sides, so once in a while we hit some impasses. So I don't mean to imply that everything was hearts and flowers. There were some points in time where some of the leaders in industry were less than excited about the visibility they were providing. They did not like that people could see how they were performing, technical schedule and cost-wise. They felt it was too open. They felt they were living in a fishbowl. And because we're all out for survival, many would try and do some interesting things. So they might, there's some jargon we use, front-loading. I'm going to build you a $500,000 home, and the first $400,000 is the foundation. So they might play a front-loading game. Not that bizarre. Don't please take that out of context. Scheduling, especially if there were incentives provided on scheduled performance, they would schedule to the late start and the late finish date, so it was easier to achieve a bonus. The customer community tended to put incentives on scheduled performance indices and cost performance indices, which might have, impacted that behavior. As a result, we had quite a few years, months, and personalities that have come and go in this game that didn't make it a fun experience for many involved on either side. There was always a feeling that there should be compliance, that one should develop and implement a system that adhered to the principles of earned value. In fact, principles that have not really changed that much since that book you can see out of Syracuse University in 1953 that Whitey Driesnack had in a class. But the interpretation has caused lots of interesting battles and wars. I thought that performance measurement joint executive group process was a very good one. Why did it disband? Because we had a couple of players that came on there, personalities can really drive this, that really kind of ruined it for the rest of us. So it was kind of wiped out because it didn't make sense to discommunicate anymore. So I wanted to say that it's not always been hearts and flowers. As a result, we have now this big debate going on between compliance, which we think everybody should comply with the spirit and intent, versus the oversight costs. So most people will tell you, I don't have a problem being compliant. I understand that I'll develop a work breakdown structure and define the work, and I'll schedule and I'll budget. But I don't know if I want to go down to level 4 in the work breakdown structure. Maybe level 3 will do. Well, the guidance doesn't say go to level 4 or 3. It says go to the level that it makes sense and then assign it out to organizations. So I have always felt that the guidance was flexible enough to do a cost-effective design and implementation. Some people would vehemently disagree with what I just said. But that's okay. It takes all kinds, and we need to have different opinions to come up with the best solution. So end result is, I think people will agree with the compliance to whatever level. They will argue with the amount of oversight. In fairness, the customer community, because General Accounting Office has to oversee a lot of the customers that we all have, they get to see a lot more than we do. And we hear stories. My consulting organization does a lot of mock reviews before the real reviews by customers. And I can swear to you that There are a lot of organizations that they design and build a car, but they don't drive it well. They need the oversight. And not everybody's created equally. Some need more oversight than others. Some have really manually documented systems held together by baling wire, and a lot of talented people. So there have been a lot of hero program managers out there that kept a lot of things going. They don't always exist on every project or in every company. So I argue there's a need for compliance and there's a need for some degree of oversight that varies with each situation. I know that's a waffle thing to say, but it really does vary with each situation. So some of the times under this theory of relationships weren't always perfect between contractor and the earned value teams and or their customer program offices, or even between the customer program offices and the earned value lead people. There's been some dissension in terms of this compliance and oversight set of situations. So sometimes organizations will have backed off on their surveillance, and unfortunately there have been a couple of times that's resulted in an ugly surprise. So the one that came out was the Navy aircraft A-12 program, 1990 timeframe, and the end result was 2 certified validated contractors were teamed on that, and they defined the work, scheduled and budgeted. They had a really technically challenging project. Nobody had ever done what they were trying to achieve, stealth capability, etc., taking off and landing from a ship. First time ever, a tough job. So while they were doing the planning and scheduling and earning and doing their analysis, they were doing all that and they were adhering to their own principles and to those of Earned Value Management System guidelines. The only challenge was they were too optimistic on their estimates to complete. They felt, none of us was trained to fail, they felt they could turn it around and get it there. So they were awarded a low rate initial production go-ahead, and then what came out somewhat soon thereafter is that the configuration wasn't firm yet, and that there was a need to go back and reassess some of the design characteristics of that. The end result was they canceled the program. Another significant event occurred as a result of the A-12 project, kind of kicked off by Wayne Abba and Gary Crystal. And the suggestion was, if we've got data there and we've got cost and schedule performance indices, have we ever really seriously looked at those? So they caused a funding, I think through one of the schools, Defense System Management College, Defense Acquisition University, whatever at the time, and Air Force Institute of Technology. Dave Christensen, who I believe was an Air Force captain at the time, working on his master's thesis. In fact, got 400 sets of data from programs from the beginning of the program. He was able to look back because he learned he knew where they ended in terms of schedule and cost performance. And he learned that things settled in at 15 or 20%, that the cost performance indices tended not to get better. And of course, a lot of people view this as a real negative discovery and, we should just give up, we'll never get better. But the real purpose was to cause you to focus in on those parts of the project that were your greatest technical and therefore schedule and cost challenges. This was the first real serious survey where we looked at the data intently to discover the things that we needed to discover, and I think was very important. I wish they'd do one every 10 years or so, because I think we learn a great deal from that. The importance of that survey is that information was shared and people were very interested in what they could learn by looking at CPIs, cost performance indices, and schedule performance indices. The end result was each of the services got even more interested in it, and another survey was commissioned, I think again by Wayne Abba and Gary Crystal, and this time they examined at different points in time, 20th percentile, 50th percentile, and 70th percentile complete. And then they broke out by Army, Navy, Air Force, And they broke out again by research and development versus production. And they learned some things like, perhaps, for example, the Air Force may have been better at predicting at the 50th percentile complete on a research and development program than the Army. Well, that was fascinating information to a number of us and to a number of contractors. But the flavor that I'm trying to share here is that contractors and the customer community were sharing and using the data to see how it would help them more proactively manage their projects. So what happens if they'd have gotten in earlier on this one particular program that we're talking about? The suggestion is they could have applied these indices and projected forward where they think they're going to finish. Gary Crystal, in an afternoon, took the data from that program and he just kind of manually calculated out some indices, and he projected forward where he thought this project would end. And he argued, and he learned this in about 4 hours, that there'd be like a slip of a year and $1 billion, a lot of money in 1991, had we looked at the data coming out of the systems. So he faulted not the contractors or the government customer, it was the U.S. Navy, but the whole process, that people weren't sitting down together looking at what the information was. And had they done that, and had they not had shades of gray, they would have thought more intelligently and come up with a better range of a best case, worst case, most likely. So that's what evolved. Prior to that, we only had one estimate of complete coming out of contractors. The contractor team said, you know, if you'd have given me the opportunity to give you a best case, worst case, most likely, I could have at least given you a range and we could have talked about that and come up with some more intelligent discussions and co-manage this thing a little bit better. It was right after that that we now have 3 estimates of complete on all the then cost performance reports evolved to contractor performance reports, now the integrated program management report. So that was a huge change in terms of at least external reporting because of that project, and a lot of surveys were kicked off because of that project to see if we could learn anything. I felt the need to document a series of these findings from contractors and government and to put out a common textbook, because I thought that it was important to share definitions of things like material price and usage variance that many people might inaccurately assume the definition thereof and come up with software that incorrectly calculated. So we created, we jokingly call it the Bible. It's 6 pounds. We tell everybody not to drop it because it's a hardback. But the persons that carried that for me were Hugh Langford primarily, because we recorded some classes we did and then they redlined them. Now, of course, at this point in time, he had 3 tours in Vietnam, F-100s, and his wife was an English master's from Harvard, so it was a perfect combination technically and grammatically to get this thing pulled together. And we're now on edition 3, and we have I think 20,000 of the books out there. But they carried the ball in terms of the documentation of what we thought was a very important discipline that we share with, of course, almost everybody out there in the industry.